Hello everyone and welcome to our week 3 group presentation. I do apologize for the raspy voice. I've been under the weather all week. This presentation will go over stereotypes, prejudice, and discrimination, attitudes, the root of the problem of social categorization into groups, reducing the problem of stereotypes, prejudice, and discrimination, and the power of persuasion. Thank you all, and I hope you all have a great week.
It seems like we are talking about these viral videos.
The previous video from a CNN News report is an example of the kind of issues we deal with and must address due to the problems of stereotypes, discrimination, and prejudice. Let's first define these terms. Stereotypes are defined in our text as a belief or association that links a whole group of people with certain traits or characteristics. It's essentially an unverified attribute assigned to a group. Prejudice is a negative feeling towards persons based upon their memberships in said groups. Discrimination is the resulting behavior directed against persons because of their membership in particular groups. Essentially, stereotypes and prejudice beget discrimination. Racism is prejudice and discrimination based on a person's racial background or institutional and cultural practices that promote domination of one racial group over the other. Sexism is prejudice and discrimination based on a person's gender or institutional and cultural practices that promote domination of one gender over the other. Modern racism is a form of prejudice that surfaces in subtle ways when it is safe, socially acceptable, and easy to recognize. I'm actually going to associate this with the story in a book regarding the Pittsburgh, and I know I'm on a Pittsburgh roll here, but unfortunately that's the case. Where the predominantly white high school fans run onto the basketball court in banana suits and yelling racial epithets. What this story does not mention is that they also have been known to throw bananas onto the basketball court at the African American players. This sort of subtle racism, which can be easily brushed off as horseplay or competitive banter, is the sort of socially acceptable racism that we tend to see in this day and age. This team actually has been doing this for decades, and I'm not sure they've ever had any sort of reprimand. Aversive racism, also referred to as a microaggression, is racism that concerns the ambivalence between fair-minded attitudes and beliefs on the one hand, and unconscious and unrecognized prejudicial feelings, prejudicial, and I'm going to keep messing it up, feelings and beliefs on the other hand. An example of a microaggression is assuming that an African American listens to rap music or asking an Asian American how to spell your name in Mandarin. We cannot assume that people belonging to particular racial groups hold particular characteristics or skills. Implicit racism is racism that operates unconsciously and unintentionally. It can be measured by asking questions about attitudes. The implicit attitudes test is a tool of measurement, for implicit racism, and we will discuss that further in the presentation. There are multiple types of sexism. Ambivalent sexism consists of two elements. Hostile sexism, characterized by negative, resentful feelings about women's abilities, values, and challenge to men's power. And benevolent sexism, characterized by affectionate or chivalrous feelings and actions, which could be potentially patronizing to women. Objectification is the act of treating women as objects or tools instead of human beings. Many times you'll see this used in media, advertising, and also men can experience objectification as well. Stereotypes and prejudices are formed through a number of channels, specifically opinions of our family, information received through media channels, our social environment, including our friends and coworkers, and our own experiences, all work together to form our attitudes, along with many other factors. Attitude is a positive, negative, or mixed reaction to a person, object, or idea. In this section, we will target three main questions. How are attitudes formed? How do attitudes affect behavior? And how are attitudes measured? How are attitudes formed? Attitudes can be inherited through genetics or learned through experience. Abraham Tesser hypothesized in a 1993 study that strong likes and dislikes were rooted in our genetic makeup. In his research, Tesser found that participants were quick to answer and less likely to alter their views to align with others if the topics at hand were regarding strong ideas such as attitudes towards sexual promiscuity, religion, and the death penalty, to name a few. Research has also stated that identical twins raised separately share similar attitudes in the same manner as twins who are raised together in the same household. Learned attitudes can be developed as a result of our exposure to attitude objects, our history of reward and punishment, the attitudes that our parents, friends, and enemies express, the social and cultural context in which we live, and other types of experiences. Theodore Newcomb, in a 1943 study, surveyed the political attitudes of students at an all-women's college in Vermont. The student population was mostly affluent and conservative. Newcomb found that students over the course of their college career became more liberal as they were exposed to professors and peers who held a more liberal view. This is believed to be due to the link between environment and attitude. Attitudes may also be developed by the experience and or feeling we associate with them. Evaluative conditioning is the process of forming a positive or negative attitude towards a neutral stimuli due to its association with a positive or negative person, place, or thing. We see this process of association used in advertising by using certain music, colors, or personalities, and also in the political scene as well. A notable study on reflecting evaluative conditioning would be Pavlov's dog. Does attitude influence behavior? According to Stephen Cross's 1995 meta-analysis regarding attitude and behavior, attitudes significantly and substantially predict future behavior. The theory of planned behavior states that attitudes toward a specific behavior combined with subjective norms and perceived control to influence a person's actions. We'll continue that discussion on the next slide. Isaac Agin's 1991 theory suggests that our attitudes influence our behavior through a process of deliberate decision-making. Our attitude towards behavior plus subjective norms, which are what we believe about what others think we should do, i.e., am I doing the right thing? Keeping in mind, subjective norms can be culturally varied. In addition, perceived behavior control, which is a condition under which we feel we can control our behavior. These three processes lead to intention, which is the plan to conduct the behavior. But keeping in mind, people don't always allow their intentions to lead to a particular behavior. For instance, if we do not feel we can engage in a particular behavior via perceived behavior control, and that feeling is more strong than the other two, we're likely not to develop the intention to conduct the behavior. How are attitudes measured? Measurement can be tricky. At one point, there were over 500 different methods available to determine a person's attitude. Listed on the screen now are a few of the more common methods of measuring attitude. Self-report is a survey or Likert type scale. Its benefits are that it's direct and straightforward, and challenges are that it's easily affected by wording, question order, or context, as wording can be an emotional trigger for people. Secondly, we have covert measurement, which can be done through an EMG or observations. An EMG is a machine which measures facial muscle response to stimuli. Observations can be collected indirectly. They measure facial expression, tone of voice, and body language, keeping in mind, though, that those things can be misinterpreted and are misrepresented. Implicit attitude measures those attitudes which we may not be aware of or are unable to self-report. They are typically done in a fast or quick fashion, with participants receiving images and wording to associate with. Okay, so I'm going to This is just a larger visual of my test results. Again, I had a strong automatic preference for young people over old people, which again, I did not assume that be the case. There is a link to this test at Harvard in the description of the video and also in our textbook under the IAT test section in chapter 6. Social categorization and intergroups are at the root of the issues of stereotyping, prejudice, and discrimination. Social categorization is the classification of persons into groups on the basis of common attributes. Pros of social categorization are that they are somewhat natural and adaptive, and they allow us to form impressions quickly. We use this process to save time so that we can essentially categorize people into groups in our head to determine who they are. Cons of social categorization are that we tend to underestimate differences within groups, as well as overestimate differences between groups, resulting in inaccuracies. In a 2008 study, Melissa Williams and Jennifer Eberhardt found that people who think of race as biologically determined are less likely to interact with racial outgroup members and are likely to accept racial inequity. People who believe race is a social concept are the exact opposite. They are more likely to interact with outgroups and less likely to accept racial inequities. In-groups and outgroups are methods by which we classify people based upon their attributes. In-groups are groups that we identify with personally via factors such as country, religion, race, sports teams, or political affiliation, etc. We feel a sense of familiarity and membership to these groups. Outgroups are groups that are different than our own. We do not necessarily feel a sense of membership to these groups. The outgroup homogeneity effect is the effect assuming that there is more similarity among members in an outgroup than an in-group. For example, an HR department staff may assume that every staff member in the IT department can fix their PC. Next, we will review ways in which we can reduce the problems of stereotypes, prejudice, and discrimination. Intergroup contact and the contact hypothesis theorizes that direct contact between hostile groups will reduce intergroup prejudice under certain conditions. In 1954, during the height of segregation, the U.S. Supreme Court ruled in the historic Brown versus Board of Education of Topeka case that racially separated schools were a violation of the U.S. Constitution. Social psychologists played an important role in providing evidence in the case. Unfortunately, many schools were not integrated until well into the 70s. Many questioned if it was actually working in a positive manner to reduce prejudice. Walter Stevens' 1986 review of a number of studies concluded that intergroup contact or integration was actually not working in a positive manner, with 53% of students reporting that racism had increased since integration, and only 13% stating it had been reduced. Fortunately, a meta-analysis conducted by Linda Trop and Thomas Pettigrew some years later in the early 2000s indicated that indeed integration did reduce prejudice under certain circumstances. Those circumstances are equal status, meaning the two groups are on a level playing field, and one is not positioned higher than the other. Personal interaction. The contact should involve one-on-one interactions among individuals to reduce peer influence. Cooperative activities, having the groups work towards a common goal. And social norms. Parents and teachers or persons in authority should favor the interaction and be encouraging. Additional ways to reduce stereotypes are changing cognitions, cultures, and motivations. Being exposed to and thinking about examples of group members that are inconsistent with the stereotype. Learning about the variability that exists among people in a particular group. Being induced to take the perspective of a person from the stereotyped group. Influence of our peers, exposure to differing cultures, and education. This is not an all-encompassing group, and there are actually more mentioned in our text.